All right, I'm going to start recording. Good morning and welcome to our Coordinated Entry Data Elements training. We're going to review a few different data elements that are kind of coming online or taking on a new role, and we want to make sure that it's really clear for folks what you're seeing and how to utilize these elements in our communities. Thanks for joining us. A couple technical reminders that you can ask questions via chat or via your mic. We'll pause for some question answer portions. And today we are recording this training and we'll post it on the trainings page for our website. So that's our NCCEH Data Center trainings page. We'll send it out to you too, so you get that link directly. Okay, so our agenda is pretty straightforward today. We are going to go through two elements for part one, coordinated entry assessment and coordinated entry event. We want to review what those mean, how we use them, when we use them, and then we'll do a demo in HMIS. And then part two, we're splitting this up because of a few differences for who this element applies to. Part two will focus on current living situation, and we'll demo that as well. Please feel free to ask questions throughout, but we'll also, save time at the end for your questions. Okay, so we are starting off with the coordinated entry data elements. And these are, just to ground us, this is the data elements that are going to support our client's journey from the housing crisis to housing stabilization and really mark that journey in our system, in HMIS. When we're talking about coordinated entry, what are we really referring to? Because HUD uses this language in a lot of different ways. So as we're looking at coordinated entry data elements for HMIS, that's a little bit more, has a specific meaning. So all of these different projects may interact with coordinated entry, participate in coordinated entry. That's everything from access points, where folks are presenting for services and being assessed, the assessment in our communities. It also, coordinated entry also revolves around prioritization and how we are connecting people to resources, our limited resources in communities. And finally, those referrals that ultimately connect folks to housing resources or crisis resources. And so when we're thinking about this, this does involve all of our different types of HMIS project types. Everything from homeless prevention to supportive services and diversion. Those might be some of the first places someone prevents for services. Of course, street outreach, meeting folks in the community, meeting them where they are. We also have permanent housing projects here, rapid rehousing, other community services or non-HUD housing providers, and permanent supportive housing. So those are more of the receivers usually of referrals after prioritization. And so again, just going over those four components of coordinated entry, it encompasses access, assessment, prioritization, and referral. And emergency shelter, other kind of aftercare, prevention, and transitional housing can really play a role in a lot of those different components. So these aren't in any particular order, just wanted to show you the gambit of coordinated entry.
I also just wanted to make a note that some, like the prevention and aftercare, sometimes we do have supports in place to prevent folks from coming back into homelessness. That also might be part of your coordinated entry process and system. So don't forget about those folks as well, or any of those services that are ongoing for folks to those follow-up services or aftercare type things.
absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about our first data element. We're reviewing coordinated entry assessment. And what this data element does is it collects information on an assessment's date, location, and result. So far, so good. This is going to apply to our homeless prevention, diversion, and coordinated entry access points. And this is really about collecting and just recording that that assessment took place. So folks are already conducting these assessments, and now we have a different way to record that that took place, and a little bit of additional information about that, including assessment level. So we're identifying whether this was an assessment around crisis needs or immediate emergency needs. That would be something like temporary shelter, or housing needs for a longer term stabilization, which would look more like our permanent housing resources in the community. So we distinguish the assessment based on level. And then we also...
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nicole, thanks.
I was going to say, just so you guys can maybe frame it in what's currently taking place in your community, for most communities, the crisis needs assessment is kind of like that prevention diversion, trying to prevent folks from coming into our system, and if they are coming into our system, kind of getting them immediately where they need to go. And that housing needs assessment currently is VI SPDAT for most of our communities, for assessing that housing needs so that we can get them to the right folks. So just to help the different assessment levels kind of figure out where those are in your community, it's probably one of those two assessments. And anyone who is doing these assessments needs to be using this data element within the community. Sorry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Putting that in the local context. Thank you. Yes. So we are already doing assessments in the community, and now we're recording this. The other detail for coordinated entry assessment to highlight is prioritization status, which is referring to whether the client is placed on a prioritization list or binding list for our housing resources. And again, this is just referring to is the person placed on the list or not because of this assessment. Nicole referenced that the VI SPDAT is used a lot as a housing needs assessment, and then just separating that a little bit from the prioritization process will help you respond to our prioritization status. Because, in a lot of our regions and communities, they're taking into consideration the housing needs score, that VI SPDAT score, and other factors. So that's a part of that prioritization based on assessment results. Great. A little more information about this data element. So who are we collecting this for? Heads of households only. So just one response for this element per household. And this can be collected whenever it occurs. So the data collection stage that this applies to and that you'll see this data element on are our project starts, our interim, our exits, wherever you're collecting that data. Okay, so some reminders that this is the record of the assessment occurring, not necessarily the results of that assessment, like those detailed VI SPDAT questions, right? So this does not replace entering that VI SPDAT into HMIS. It records that that occurred. And we do want to note that there's some dates in here we'll highlight for you. You can use the same date for start, information date, and end date. And I'll show you how that really shows up in HMIS, where you can just apply that for the same date there. All right. So let's take a look at this on our paper form first, just to go into the specific questions. This breaks it down by, what data you're really collecting, and then we'll be able to see that in HMIS. So on our paper assessment, you don't have to use paper assessments, but this is a good way to show you how to fill this out. What you'll see first is the date of the assessment. So that will likely be the same date as either, project start or your update, your interim or annual. And so you're just going to include that same date there. And then we have a kind of customized section for assessment location. This is based on the COC community decisions here. So for Orange, we've got some specified some customized locations that make sense for our Orange community. And for Balance of State, we have it broken down by regions. If we were going to go, very specific in Balance of State, the list would get pretty long. So that's going to be divided up by region for Balance of State. And then Durham is still in some ongoing conversations there. Great. Anything to add, Nicole, about the locations here?
Currently, Orange and Balance of State have decided on what those options are. Durham has not made that decision yet and are still kind of in the process of that. So you will see those appearing at some point. It's just right now they haven't fully made that decision for their COC. So those will also show up at some point. It's just right now Orange and Balance of State are the ones that have made those decisions and have built it out. So be on the lookout for updates to that, and hopefully just choose the one that's appropriate for your COC. If you operate in a different COC, please do not choose Orange or Balance of State, right? Choose the one that's appropriate for your COC, or else we're going to get some funky data going on. So please make sure you're choosing the appropriate option. And if you don't have an option that's appropriate for you, give us a contact and we can help talk that through, and maybe the COC needs to add an option. So just let us know if you're seeing options that don't make sense.
Absolutely. The idea of this, this portion of the data element is to make sense for our community. Okay, so next after location, we've got it broken down by assessment type, assessment level, and prioritization status. Assessment type, pretty straightforward. We've got phone, in-person, or virtual. This is referring to the method of the assessment. How did you conduct this assessment? On the phone, in person, or virtually another way? I think we'll be seeing a lot more of those virtual and phone assessments right during this time. Assessment level is really just distinguishing between our crisis needs assessments for immediate services like shelter, other supportive services that are not around long-term housing, and those housing needs for that longer-term stabilization and more of those permanent housing resources. Prioritization status, again, this is about is this household, is this client being placed on the prioritization list? We usually refer to this as our by name list. Okay, let me just check any questions. If anyone wants to unmute, please, let's hear some questions about this element.
We have had a couple questions come in that are not specific for the coordinate entry data elements. We understand that these are going to fit into your community and your workflows in a little bit of different way, especially for the different COCs. So just know that the workflow specific questions will be community specific, so we're not speaking to them here today. This is just like how to use the actual data elements and what they mean, and then like how they incorporate into your workflows for coordinated entry purposes on the ground will be just a little bit different for the different communities possibly. So I know that that we've also gotten some questions about like general resources and back at home. This is not a back at home specific training. And so just keep that in mind with questions, folks. And then we're happy to follow up on other things as well offline, but just this is for those data elements specifically, just a reminder. That's all the questions that we've gotten so far.
Okay, and good. That's great. That's great. Oh, I've got a raised hand here.
Carrington.
Yes, Carrington.
Here we go. So is it safe to say, as far as the assessment level, any rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing opportunities should be checked as housing needs assessment?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And I think the key thing is who's conducting that assessment. That's who needs to record this information, right?
So somebody presents and they need emergency shelter, but we don't necessarily administer that at this agency, but we're the ones that also do the coordinated entry. It would still go under housing needs assessment, correct?
Well, it depends. Are you doing the prevention diversion screen or are you doing the VI SPDAP? So VI SPDAP is what we're categorizing as housing needs assessment, and the prevention diversion is what we're categorizing as crisis needs. So it depends on the different assessment that you're completing.
I gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Yep. Great question. It's really about what role are you embodying for that particular client. I know we have a lot of hats that a lot of us are wearing, so great question to distinguish those levels. Okay, let's go over coordinated entry events before we go and demo these two kind of related elements. So coordinated entry event is it kind of pairs well with our coordinated entry assessment. This element collects key referrals, placement, and then the results of that referral events or circumstances. So this is going to include a date and an event type. It'll become a little bit clearer when we look at that whole list of applicable event types. And we are looking at this for all CE referral partners. So if you're making a referral or receiving a referral, you'll need to collect or contribute to this element. CE events may need to be updated over time until resolved. So that makes it a little bit different from the coordinated entry assessment, where that was, you just one time, right? You conduct the VI SPDAP, that is one date, but this may occur over a period of time because referrals may take a second, right? So if that referral is for permanent housing projects, there's a result and date of that result recorded as well. This again is collected for heads of households only, so just one collection here per household, and it's collected whenever it occurs. So our data collection stages are at client's project start, any of those interims, or project exit. And just a reminder that there is some conditional logic in this question. So do follow the, if the response is this, then do this. And I'll walk through that with you in this paper assessment detail. And we do have some dates that we'll go over in HMIS where you can use the same start information and end date. All right, so on the paper assessment, let's get into the details to really wrap our minds around this. Coordinated entry event begins with the date of the event. This may be, it's referred to as the start date in HMIS, so just keep that in mind. And this is going to be the same date as the, the update, the start, the exit, whichever data collection stage you're collecting this information on. And then we have the types of events. These are divided into two categories. First off is access events, and those are defined as homeless prevention assistance, problem solving, diversion, those rapid resolution conversations, then there's a couple referrals that are included in access events. Scheduling an assessment. So that is connecting someone to access resources, right? Whether those are, immediate crisis needs or housing needs, but potentially you don't, maybe if you don't conduct that yourself, then you can record that referral to schedule that assessment. If you're just doing the assessment right then, that you wouldn't need to record that as an event. You would record the assessment itself, right? So this is only as applicable. All right, and then the second category is our referral events, and these have a couple. They have a lot more options here. So post-placement or follow-up case management, that would be our aftercare services. So if you have a referral for those, you can mark that. Referral to street outreach, it begins to break down a little bit more by project type here. Housing navigation or services that's specified and broken out. And then you can also record non-continuum services. So services that are outside our system, our regular resources. This is especially important for recording ineligibility. If our community can't serve this person, then you can, and you're able to refer to some non-continuum services, you can mark that there. And then, of course, if there's no availability. So as we go down our event types, we've got then emergency shelter, referral to emergency shelter, referral to transitional housing. We don't have any joint transitional housing, rapid rehousing projects, so we'll skip that option usually. And then referral to rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, or other permanent housing. We don't see other permanent housing a lot. That's a permanent housing project that doesn't include services, those wraparound services like permanent supportive housing. Okay, so we've got those types described there, those event types, and then on the right-hand side, we've got some indication of our conditional logic. So if we have a problem-solving or diversion conversation, we're going to go to A, and that's just a little bit below. We have, was the client housed or rehoused in a safe alternative? So if we have that conversation, we want to record the results. Same thing for referral to post-placement or follow-up case management. If I go back, that said go to B, and B is labeled here for enrolled in aftercare projects. So was that referral successful in getting an enrollment? Yes or no? And then finally, for our shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, there are a few follow-up questions here. First off, in C, the location of this referral. So that's the project name. Who are you referring them to? A specific shelter, a specific permanent supportive housing agency. Just write that in there. And then, as applicable, you'll enter the referral result and the date of the result. Now, if you're sending the referral, you might not have the information about the referral result and the date, right? You're waiting for that. So those two sections there may be blank when you're first conducting this event. Okay. Hopefully these arrows and lettering are fairly clear in terms of leading us towards those follow-up questions. Okay, well, let's look at this in HMIS. And just a quick reminder before we go into HMIS, remember we've got to check our enter data as mode, whether that's our default or a manually selected one. The right date for any data entry. Are you backdating? Is it for the current date? And then are you at the right stage? You can collect this data when it occurs in a client's enrollment. So that could be start, that could be interim, or that could be exit. Okay, there we go. Oh, excellent, it didn't log me out. Okay, so I'm headed over to HMIS, and I'm going to pretend to be Helen Housing, our trustee agency administrator at Heading Home, a fake agency. And for our demonstration of coordinated entry assessment and entry, or event, sorry, I'm going to enter data as a street outreach project because that has both of those. They are an access point, right? And I'm going to enter that for today's date. All right, so I'm not going into backdate mode, but I am in enter data as mode. And Home Solo is going to get some services. I'm typing his number in here. We use our current date. Okay, so for these elements, you know, this is occurring through our regular data entry procedure, starting off with that client profile, making your way to the right. I'm going to skip ahead and go right into entry exit tab, and I'm going to add my entry exit to show you the start. We're just serving Home Solo today. Remember that these two elements are just recorded for heads of households. Okay, I can feel the anticipation building. We're just going to wait for this to load a second. Okay, so remember, this does not mean, you know, we have to do all the other data entries, but I'm going to skip right down to our coordinated entry elements. These are going to be towards the bottom. And just skipping past that. Okay, past our natural disaster. And for street outreach, they may be doing the housing needs assessment, also known as the SBAT, on start. So that is selected there. So we're going to skip down here to coordinated entry assessment. All right. So you can see that this is a sub-assessment in the terms of our service point software. And so you can see, you know, depending on Sharon, what has previously occurred for this client. So Home Solo has previously been assessed in some different places by 211 and also Orange County. We're going to add our assessment that we're conducting today using that big add button. And here we're going to note the date of the assessment, just today's date. This date should pop up automatically. If you're in backdate mode, it'll be your backdate date, and if not, it'll be your current date. And I'm going to put in the same end date here. Just use that check mark there to set to current date, 9/23. All right, and then location. So we've got our locations here, the list that you saw on the paper form, and one extra. Since those paper forms never apply to 211, we didn't put that on the paper form. Okay, and oh, I'm going to get this wrong. What region is Rowan County? 5. I feel like it's 5. Nicole, please correct me if not. All right, so we picked the appropriate location, and then we picked the assessment type. We were in person because we were in this outreach project. Assessment level, we did the SBAT, so I'm going to say that was the housing needs, and placed on prioritization list. That score was appropriate for being placed on the prioritization list. And then we save. Boom. There it is. Great. One other thing to note here is that you can see the history if you click on this magnifying glass. this can sometimes be a little overwhelming, but you can also print that off there. So that can be helpful.
And
okay.
just, I think this is a great view of it, and also, like, as you know, your visibility allows, you can see how over time we will get a great history of what has happened with our folks, right? Like, of what different referrals they've had and to where and how many times they've been assessed and how and all of those things. So, like, as they continue to receive services in your community, even over years, right? Because some folks go into housing for a little while and then come back to the homeless community for whatever reason. Over time, we're going to get a really rich history of what this person's journey has been with homelessness. And this is going to, like, just look at, like, all of the data that just kind of continues to add here. I think it's going to be really helpful long term once we start using this to really see what is and isn't happening for our folks in our communities. So I know it seems like a lot, more data to input, but I do think that this can be really valuable data that we're going to be starting to collect that we haven't really had a view or perspective on before that can really help us make some informed decisions about our systems. Just wanted to plug that and put that in there because I see it's just nice to see it like this with the additional data adding and adding and adding to the sub-assessment.
Definitely. And this is going to help us make decisions not only about the system, but about individual clients too. So let's go into this coordinated entry event. This question had those follow-ups, right? That conditional logic, so it's a little bit longer. And here again, there's some dates at the top, and we're just going to record all of those as the same date. This event occurred today. And then we have our list of events. This is kind of the next question here. You can see that it's divided by category with just this row here, and then you'll have your different responses available to select. Let's see, what else to say about this? I'm going to refer to rapid rehousing here. And then the one thing to really pay attention to is these prompts. So if an answer was problem solving or diversion, then we respond here, yes or no. So we do have to really pay attention to those bolded prompts to make sure we're answering the appropriate follow-up question. And again, that other yes, no question for kind of the aftercare is available here. And then finally we get to a follow-up question for our rapid rehousing referral or shelter or transitional housing. This is the location of the crisis housing or permanent housing referral. So this is a lookup tool. We're going to look up that project. And so what appears is a pop-up with some search capabilities for operational providers. Here we can search by name, right? By agency name, that'll pop up. You can also search by provider ID. There we are. And so that gives you a little bit of flexibility for how to search. We are currently working with WellSky to add some of our symbols back to this and kind of get it formatted in a way that we usually look at our project names. But for right now, we can search by ID, name, and add those projects using our plus sign, identify who received that referral.
And for all of you folks who received those lists of provider page cleanup and requesting whether these folks are active in your system or not, this is why, because as you saw, there were over 2,000 options. If you just like clicked on it and hadn't searched yet, there's over 2,000 pages in there that you can see. And so you have visibility to every single page in the system on this lookup, which is okay, right? Because you might be referring outside your community. That's okay. We just, there's a lot of those extra provider pages in there that we want to clean up to make it a little bit easier for you guys to sort through on the front end. So that's why we are sending that out. Now you can see what it looks like on the front end and why we would like to clean it up a little bit for you. So we're still working on that. We've just got the list back recently, so we are working on that. So it'll be less than 2,000 here at some point. Yes, use your search features there.
Absolutely. All right. And so then as the person that is referring to another project, I would actually just save and save this response here because I'm still waiting for a referral result, right? But just to show you this dropdown, we have referral results of successful or unsuccessful with some different reasons. Unsuccessful, the client rejected, but it's their choice, right, to reject a referral, or unsuccessful because the provider rejected. That's not necessarily like a bad thing, right? If a client's referred to you and they don't meet eligibility, you're going to have to reject that referral, right? So just select the appropriate one and that date. All right, so now that's there and we're building this history and I'm saving it actually. And obviously you're going to want to do the rest of your data entry on whatever collection stage you're pursuing. Okay, so I'm going to head back over here to our PowerPoint. Any questions pop up, Nicole, that we should address?
We have had at least one question that I think would be helpful to just mention is that, hold on, it's like who's requiring this, right? Or like why? Yes. So just wanted to mention that these, because I know a lot, there's been a lot of planning around back at home. And so like some folks, there's just a lot of information coming at you. These are actually HUD required data elements. So these are HUD required coordinated entry data elements that are required for all communities that are getting coordinated entry CE-SSO funding. So for us currently, that's Balance of State and Orange. Durham is not getting that CE funding, but Orange and Balance of State are getting that funding. So HUD is requiring as of October 1 that we start collecting these data elements for our communities and our coordinated entry processes across the COCs, right? So it's not just back at home. It's not just the CE like project where you're entering all of your data at. This is across the whole COC, and whoever is doing these activities should be accounting for this in their data entry, because when we pull the report that needs to go to HUD, we pull it for the whole COC. And so even if a shelter enters this information or a rapid rehousing project enters this information, it'll all pull on the report and feed up to the big report that we're going to be submitting. And when we pull big reports, it's going to feed up to that as well. So this is not just a back at home thing. This is not just a coordinated entry project for coordinated entry specific staff. This is for the whole COC. I do think that at some point Durham is going to start using these in some capacity in certain things, but they're not required to as of October 1. So they're taking a little bit more time to plan that and see what that looks like. So if you're in the Durham COC, more information will be coming out about that as Durham kind of figures out how they want to use that at their COC. And for Orange and Balance of State folks, we'll be starting to use these. We can start using them this week, but they are going to be required as of October 1 for all community providers that are doing these activities. So if you're doing assessments, you're recording assessments. If you're doing referrals, you're recording referrals. Each of those pieces you should be entering for who you're serving and what activities you're doing. So that is one of the questions. And then I think there's also another good question about what happens if folks are on more than one prioritization list, right? Like if they're moving different communities. So I think ideally folks are on one community list, right? Hopefully they're not on 6 different community lists. Hopefully they're on one community list. We know that folks move around, especially in like our tight urban areas between like, Raleigh, Durham, and Orange, right? Folks move around a lot in there. And also within the Balance of State, folks move regions. So ideally, folks would be on one community list. We know that there's overlap and stuff like that, but that's why we have that time period, right, of after so long for coordinated entry, we take that person off of our list. So we're hoping that either they've been housed or another community is picking them up in that situation. So if they come back to your community, you know, and or if you have continued contact with them and they've moved to another community, they can just let you know. So we know there is going to be a little bit of overlap. Ideally, there aren't 6 different communities that are trying to house this person at the same time. But we know that there is going to be a little bit of overlap, especially in time periods where folks might be on more than one by name list. That's okay. There's not a problem with that. It's just ideally, you know, one community would be focusing on that person as opposed to like 3. So that's okay though.
Awesome. Okay, good question. So just summing up what we just went over in that demo and kind of review of these questions. So if we're talking about our coordinated entry assessment and event element, what projects does this apply to? Coordinated entry assessment applies to all of our access points, including prevention and diversion. Think of it as if you do a VI-SPDAP, you should be recording that coordinated entry assessment. And for coordinated entry events, that's around our referral partners. So are you referring to a project? Are you receiving a referral? When do you collect this information? This is as it occurs. So when a crisis or housing assessment occurs, and when one of those qualifying events occurs. So that those qualifying events were problem solving, you know, referral to aftercare, referral to even outside continuum services, but also really focusing on those crisis services like shelter and transitional housing, street outreach, or permanent housing resources. And which clients does this apply to? Heads of household. This is one per household. Okay, well, let's get to current living situation. This is our other element that supports coordinated entry and is, you may have been kind of introduced to street outreach, but we want to make sure it's clear for our coordinated entry project. So current living situation is where the client is staying at the time of interaction. So this is very similar to some of our other questions like prior living situation or exit destination. That's definitely referring to, you know, where a client is staying. But it does look at where they're staying at that time of interaction. And this is really about supporting but not replacing eligibility verification. This is about tracking the client's journey, especially for our you know, supportive services or street outreach projects. Clients move around, right? You're working with folks that are, you know, maybe staying a day here, but it's not stable, it's couch surfing, right? Versus staying another place for, you know, a few other nights. So this is really allowing you to track that, that change there. This must be collected for street outreach projects, those HUD SSO grantee projects for coordinated entry, and all PATH projects. So it's a little bit narrower, audience for this and requirement. Now, there's one tricky part of this, right, where it says at time of interaction. This is HUD's language. They are asking for current living situation to be collected at that interaction when, and they give examples. So like when a street outreach worker meets with a client about their well-being or needs, maybe you meet at the office to talk about housing plans, or you connect about a referral to another service. So what we really want to do is you know, collect this at those key interactions, and especially if it changes, right? That is really key. All right, if you know, so if you are thinking about, well, when would I enter this? This would be, you know, definitely at your project starts, definitely at a date of engagement, definitely when you're updating a coordinated entry event or assessment, right? And definitely when those change in between. All right, who is this collected for? This is for all adults and heads of households. So, you know, since this really focuses on street outreach, that may be just a lot of single households, but if you do have multiple adults in a household, we need to be collecting where both of those adults are all, you know, however many adults there are in that household, where they are staying at that time of interaction. This can occur at any data collection stage, so project start, interim, or exit, anytime you're engaging with the client. And, you know, just again, want to give you that special reminder that any contact with the client, especially when that result changes, should be updated in HMIS. And this could mean, you know, a few interim updates, right? So we're really going to lean into that interim update option there. Let's take a look at what this really says in the paper assessment. So first, there's a date. When was this contact with the client? Similar to our other elements. And then types of living situations. These are divided by homeless, institutional, and temporary or permanent situations. This is almost exactly the same as our prior living situation or exit destination list. Very few differences. So you'll be very familiar with this. And you just tick off the appropriate response for where that client is staying. So we have that. Now, of course, there's some follow-up questions. So if a client is in an institutional, temporary, or permanent living situation, we have some follow-up questions. The first one is, are they going to have to leave their current living situation within 14 days? That is all about category 2 homelessness, right? Are they category 2 imminently at risk of homelessness? And if they respond yes, then there are these 4 other questions. Now, if someone is not going to have to leave in 14 days, you can mark that and you don't have to respond to these other questions. So if yes to leaving within 14 days, is the client going to have to leave that situation? Then has a subsequent residence been identified? Do you have any resources, individual or family, that could be used to obtain permanent housing? What does your lease or ownership history look like in the past 60 days? And have you moved 2 or more times in the last 60 days? So these all should be recorded if the client you know, meets that first question of leaving within 14 days. There's also this text box down below for current living situation, any location details that you'd like to add. It's an optional text box. All right. I think the other key thing that we want to highlight about this particular data element is, how does this work in relationship to our other questions like prior living situations? So it's possible that you meet the client, they're presenting for services, you're completing that project start, and the night before they were couch surfing, but right now they are homeless, or right now they are staying in a hotel room paid for by a nonprofit, right? So you can see how it's likely that prior living situation and current living situation will line up and be the same, but it's possible there'd be some differences there. All right, I feel like I'm seeing a lot of flashes of chat. Are there questions we should?
Well, Carrington asked about adding a descriptor line to the interim update within HMIS so that you could like see with, or, you know, add a descriptor of like what changed in that situation. Unfortunately, the vendor determines what we can and can't modify or have ability to change within HMIS. I don't think that adding a descriptor text box to that interim screen is something that we can change. Andrea, do you think, have you ever seen that or heard that that is something that we can modify?
I haven't ever heard of that. You're suggesting maybe as the type of update or something on that kind of preview screen. Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, we can ask the vendor if there's anything customizable there, but I haven't ever heard of that being a thing that they've offered or that we can customize. Yeah, I think having some more things like that would be very helpful. So yeah, I'll check in with the vendor, but I haven't heard that that is something that's offered as a customizable or an option.
All right, good question. So in HMIS, how you could record this is, it's on Project Start, but it's also on an interim. So I'll show you there on our interim for street outreach. So on the entry exit tab, interims are right over here. And we add that interim review. Always going to be, or usually going to be an update, except during an annual assessment. And I'm going to save and continue so that we can get to the questions, get to the good pieces here. Scrolling down, All right, so as we kind of talked, oh, I have the wrong assessment here. Okay, pulling up that interim. Okay, so this is where, you would update anything that changed. I'm going to scroll down. Current living situation is towards the bottom. Here we go. Again, it's a sub-assessment, so you can see that history. And to add a new response, you're going to just click that Add button. And from here, we can kind of close it out. We're just putting this information in for today. This was our observation, our interaction with the client today. So I'm going to use the same date for end date or information date. And then here we go, current living situation. This is divided again by those categories. You know exactly when those follow-up questions apply. Let's just pretend here that our client was in jail last night in an institutional situation, and so these follow-up questions apply. And so it's not on the paper form because it's obvious that you are filling this out, but here in HMIS, you are going to need to select your own project for who's entering this, who observed this, who's verifying that. So again, I can search by project number or by name and click the plus sign to add that project. There we go. And then is the client going to leave their current living situation within 14 days? Yes. On is getting out today. And so then all of these follow-up questions would need to be recorded. And so right now we don't have a subsequent residence. We don't have resources. He did have a lease, but has not moved to a more time. So there you go. Those are the available options there. And you would save this. And then you see that completed here. So again, we're filling out all of these dates so that you don't really have to go edit anything. It's just, that moment in time we've confirmed their living situation. Okay. Yeah.
Clarifying question, Andrea. You said that they stayed in jail and prison last night. Isn't current living situation for where they're staying currently? So it might be where they're actually staying today.
My apologies. Yes. Good catch.
Okay. Just
yeah.
wanted to clarify that for folks, that it's not the prior living situation is where they stayed last night. Current living situation is where they're staying at today, which could be different.
Yes. Yes.
And then also a note for location details. This could be a great thing for street outreach folks if there is a certain park or crossroads or something that your client tends to hang out at, you can add that here as your detail. It's a text box, so you can make it whatever. If they hang out at the Starbucks on the corner of 5th and Main, or whatever, this could be a great spot for that, so that if you have other folks who are trying to find them or those kinds of things. So this is an opportunity to add some more of that rich detail, especially as folks move around the community and tend to hang out in different areas. That can be really useful for that. So that's what I would say for that location detail text boxes. That can be the location where they're most often found, or if they say that they go to a certain food pantry on Wednesdays at noon, you can put that there as well, right? So you can use that however it makes sense for you guys to use that if it's helpful.
All right, well, this is bringing us to a close. We want to just remind us what we've gone over for current living situations. We are talking about street outreach, HUD CE projects, and all paths. We're looking at recording current living situation at client interaction, and this is for all adults and heads of households. These are some of those key points there. Any other questions before we go? Happy to stay on if there are additional questions.
I haven't had anything come in through chat, so please remember you can use chat, or you can come off of mute and ask as well.
Yep. And I do have a chat coming in with a good question about, would you need an ROI for this data entry? You would want an ROI that covers this data entry, right? So if it's, it depends on where in the engagement with the client you are, but yes, ROIs are important. They do cover 1 year, so you'll just need to update that annually. All right. Okay, well, I'm going to stop recording. We can go over some more questions if you have them after this. And always, if you do come across any questions as you're going through data entry, give us, leave a message at the help desk or send us an email at hmis@ncceh.org.